Well, Michael Bossacu is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and former spokesperson for the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. He joins us live from Kyiv. Michael, thank you so much for your time. What do we know about these attacks and what has been targeted?
Sure, good to be with you, Anna. Well, this was a massive one. Ukrainian officials are telling us that there were 99 missiles and drones. Of those, about 84 were brought down. But of course, it's those that are not brought down by our defense systems that cause the most damage, including 2 power plants. DTEK, the major power provider here in Ukraine, said at least 3 thermal power plants were hit overnight. The regions hit were as far west as Lviv, Ukraine, but also Dnipropetrovsk, Vinnytsia, Ivano-Frankivsk, Cherkasy, and Chernivtsi. Kyiv, surprisingly, was relatively quiet overnight, but we did have a series of air raid alarms, and this is adding, again, not only to the damage to critical infrastructure, putting cities into blackouts, but also, of course, causing people a lot of fear and concern.
Michael, this follows a massive attack by Russia last week that left cities like Kharkiv in the dark. What has been the lasting impact of those strikes?
Sure, and also Odessa as well, where I'm usually based. I actually drove through the city on Monday night, and most of the city was actually in the dark. First time that has happened in about a year. And, you know, cities like Odessa, I mean, let's be straight about this. This is a critical component, Anna, of the global food supply chain. When there's no electricity, the port doesn't work. And it's a pity because the Ukrainians have worked very, very hard to push back the Russian Black Sea fleet to the point where the Western Black Sea reopened and grain and sunflower oil was being shipped to Western ports. But that could stop if these strikes continue. And one more thing, you know, there's also what's going on here beneath the surface, what I call kind of death by 1,000 cuts. Ukraine's best and brightest are scared too. You can't blame them. And they're leaving slowly one by one from the calculations and observations I'm making.
Michael, you talk about the damage, but you also mentioned, I guess, the psychological impact that this is having on the population after more than 2 years of war.
Yeah, and I think the Kremlin knows very, very well what it's doing with these strikes. It is a psychological warfare as well. So we have the front line in the east where, you know, tens of thousands of men have died. But we also have the front line of rockets and drones, and then this psychological warfare, information warfare going on as well. If you ask me what Ukraine needs right now, there are really 2 things to avoid this country being occupied. And one is those critical air defense system. And the other, of course, is that $60 billion of aid, which is tied up in the U.S. Congress right now, mostly by MAGA Republicans. So that cannot come soon enough. Ukraine needs it so badly.
Yeah, how is that deadlock impacting Ukraine's ability to fend off these attacks?
Right. Well, I just spoke to one of the most renowned Ukrainian singers last night, Mary Chaba, and she just returned to the front line, and she said she couldn't believe the difference right now on the front lines. Not only are the soldiers having to ration ammunition, I'm hearing figures of for every 10 rounds coming from the Russian side, only 1 is returned by the Ukrainian side. But also, she said the psychological toll. She used to go there to help soldiers heal, but now she says music doesn't seem to make that bit of a difference. The other thing that aid is meant to do is to help budget support. The IMF just came out with a report, Anna, that said Ukraine's economy is headed into very strong headwinds. And if with a $5 billion a month budget gap, if that support doesn't come in, you're going to start seeing holdbacks on pensions, teachers' salaries, that sort of thing. It's really a catastrophe.
Michael, in an interview this week, President Zelensky said war can come to Europe and to the United States, obviously the US being dragged into a NATO-fought war. It comes as Vladimir Putin warns countries, those that allow F-16 fighter jets for Ukraine to be based in their countries, they will then become legitimate targets. What's the feeling where you are?
Well, you've hit it right on the head, and this is something I've been amplifying on CNN Opinion as well, is that if this war is not stopped here in Ukraine, it will come to people's front doors. And that could be anywhere from more Russian gray zone warfare activity, but also higher food prices. And also, I think in the crosshairs of Mr. Putin is NATO countries like Poland, but particularly the Baltic states. And that will be a lot more costlier for the West. It will be deadlier because NATO troops, American troops, will have to come on the ground there. Look, one quick factoid here is for 3 to 4% of the annual U.S. military budget, Ukraine has been able to destroy about 50% of conventional Russian military capability. That's a real deal. So I can't understand the rationale to hold this back, even if it is for domestic political purposes.
Michael, it's so important for us to hear your perspective, on the ground from Kyiv. Michael Bossack, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.